Hello again. Today we're going to talk about 20 tips for dealing with fear. This is the follow-on from our discussion about emotion in general and how to have a good conversation between emotion and reason as you begin to make decisions. As you remember, where we left it was we were going to talk about dealing with fear effectively, and that's the purpose of today's presentation. So let's begin by looking at the 67th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord tells the assembled brethren, Behold and lo, mine eyes are upon you, and the heavens and the earth are in mine hands, and the riches of eternity are mine to give. Ye endeavored to believe that ye should receive the blessing which was offered unto you. But behold, verily I say unto you, there were fears in your hearts, and verily this is the reason that ye did not receive. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video for the next couple of minutes and answer these two questions below. Why did the Lord indicate that fear held back revelation? And in what ways is fear the reason that we did not receive many things in our own lives? So pause that, take a minute and think about the answers, and then restart and we'll move on. So I think the basic reason for me is fear is the opposite of faith. Fear holds us back because it's the opposite of faith, and that's certainly faith is a principle of revelation, but it's also a principle of action. And fear is often a principle of inaction. One of the things that we do when we're afraid is we don't want to act. We want to sit back and wait and see how things will evolve, or we just want to wrap ourselves in a cocoon and not act at all. Another reason is that faith is based on true belief, and fear is often, not always, but often, the response to false and inaccurate beliefs or perceptions about the world. Fear is a biological response that keeps our bodies alive when it perceives true threats. But the world in which we live, we often perceive false threats, and our fear is often based on things that aren't true. Finally, for me, faith has an outward and upward focus, but fear begets an inward and downward focus. So when I'm afraid, what I tend to do is focus on myself, my own needs, and it sort of is a spiral downwards in terms of pessimism and negativity, which is the opposite of faith. So what I want to do in this presentation is talk to you about some very practical ways that you can adopt to overcome fear. One of the goals of this presentation is that at the end, you will have selected 3 or 4 things that you can do to help reduce fear as an impediment to your own decision making. So let's get some basics down. The first basic reality is admit that you're afraid. It doesn't do any good to avoid or deny that we're ever afraid. If we feel fear, we need to stop. We need to feel it, but we need to don't be it. What that means is that we can recognize that we are afraid, and often when we take a moment and feel our fear, it has a very defanging effect and makes that fear somehow less ominous. But at the end of the day, what we can decide is that we don't have to be driven by fear. We can make decisions on another basis where our fears might inform our reason, but our reason will also inform our fears. Secondly, pray for help. The Lord commands us in many, many places that we fear not. And so if He wants us to not be afraid, I'm convinced and I know that He'll help us overcome specific fears and overcome our tendency toward fear in general when we reach out to Him for help. What I want to do now is introduce some baby steps, some very simple things that you can do to reduce the amount of fear and tension that you might feel in your life. One of the responses that we have when we're afraid is that we tend to get into our comfort zone. We don't like uncertainty, and so what we want is life that's predictable, that we can plan on, and that everything is going to work out exactly as we know it should. Well, that's one way of avoiding fear, is to lock ourselves into a very small world, a very predictable world where we're used to everything that will happen. But that isn't a great way to live our lives. So here are some really simple things that you can do to begin to reduce your level of fear and anxiety. Take a different route to work or school. One of the things that we want to be most predictable is how we get to and from our jobs, making sure that we can get to and from our jobs in a time frame that we understand. So one of the things you can do is shake it up a little bit. Take a different route to school, walk along a different street, drive a different way. One of the other things you can do is use a different means of transportation. If you're always driving to school and it's possible for you, try walking, try biking. You might even try using public transportation. What this is a way, many of us are afraid of public transportation because we think we'll be late or it will be dirty or it will be unsafe somehow. If we take public transportation and just try some different ways of getting where we need to go, it often helps us overcome some of those silent fears that's so easy for us to bring up. Listen to some new music. One of the things that we all want stability in our lives is in terms of the music in the background of our lives. So try something new. If you're a classical fan, try some jazz or some rockabilly or some rock and roll. If you're a rap fan, try listening to classical music. In many ways, Bach and Snoop Doggy Dogg might have more in common than you would think. But take time to try something new and to get out of your comfort zone. Order a different menu item at your favorite restaurant. I know a number of people who, whenever they go to a particular restaurant, have a particular go-to item. And they always order that item, one, because it's good and they like it, but number two, because they're unwilling to try something else. Or in other words, they're fearful of what else they might be able to experience at the restaurant. So one of the ways, just a small, easy way to take on your fear, is order a different menu item when you're at your favorite restaurant. Hey, if you're ready to do that, why don't you just eat at a new restaurant in general? Try something new and something that you may not be used to. My wife and I are different on so many accounts, but one of the accounts is she loves to eat at new places, and I'm more of a go-to, let's go to someplace familiar guy. But over the 30 plus years that we've been married, I've eaten at a number of very different and very new restaurants. And I have to say honestly that many of them I didn't like and many of them we never went back to. However, many more I did like, and I found new things that I would be willing to try and willing to eat. And it's just a great way of overcoming the fear that we have that we'll eat something that we don't like, that the taste will be bad, that the texture will be bad. These are all fears, really, really quiet, subtle fears that we have, and these are great ways to overcome them. Finally, the last baby step, just say thanks to someone for something nice that they do. Again, gratitude, much like faith, is an outward-facing emotion. We have to be grateful to other people. And so gratitude helps us to overcome our fear and get out of our comfort zone. So these are just a list of 6 really simple baby steps, things that you can do without dramatically altering your life to work on overcoming fear. Let's now talk about some intermediate steps that you can take. These will be a little bit more difficult, require a little bit more effort, but they'll also help you take on some larger sources of fear. First, try a new unfamiliar activity. If you've never done calligraphy, give it a whirl. If you've never played golf, go out and play a round. If you've never skied, maybe spend a Saturday afternoon going skiing. The idea here is that we spend a lot of our time, particularly a lot of our free time, on things that we know are going to provide satisfaction to us. And the flip side of that is we don't try new things because we're afraid that they won't make us as happy or be as pleasing as other things that we do. So just try something new. Take a class in a new subject. Most of you will be graduating this semester, but some of you will go on. So take a weaving class, take a ballroom dancing class, take a geology class. And if you're graduating, you can always take classes at a community college. Or local high schools often have evening programs. Not only is it a great thing for you to do by yourself, but with those that you love, a spouse or a significant other. It's a great way to build a bond between you, but once again, it gets you out of your comfort zone in a more sustained way and over a longer period of time, and it introduces you to something that you might have been fearful about. Bake a cake or grill a steak. Both of those are fairly high-risk activities, and by bake a cake, I'm not meaning open a box of Betty Crocker cake mix, add water, and throw it in the oven. I'm talking about bake a cake from scratch. There's a lot that can go wrong when you bake a cake, and a lot can go wrong when you grill a steak. You pay a lot of money for that piece of meat. Your coals might be too hot. They might not be hot enough. It's easy to undercook, overcook, and all of a sudden your $10 piece of meat, you might feel like you didn't get the complete value out of it. So take a big risk. Go ahead and do something, cook something new. And if you haven't cooked, cook anything. So this is, again, a more intermediate way to get you out of your comfort zone and to get you to try something new. Go for flow. And we know from positive psychology that flow is that state where we're completely engaged in an activity, and we know how to get to flow. We know that flow can't be so far above our competence level that we simply become frustrated, nor can it be so far within our competence band that it's easy and boring. You have to go just beyond where you really feel comfortable doing something. So push yourself. If you knit, try something that gets you out of that competence level and pushes you just one step forward. If you golf, go play a difficult course or do something that gets you just beyond your level of comfort and competence and try to establish that state of flow. It's a great way to overcome fear because you're trying something new, you're doing something new, but you're also getting internal psychological validation for that which you're doing. Serve the homeless, kids in a hospital, or the elderly. These are three groups and situations and contexts that many of us would rather avoid. With the homeless, we often say there, but for the grace of God go I. Kids in a hospital is particularly challenging, particularly for those who have children, or to see suffering by children who don't necessarily deserve it. And we're all a little bit leery of the elderly because we know we're going to get there someday. We just like to put it off as long as possible. So one of the ways that we allow our fears to dictate what we do is we don't serve people who make us uncomfortable. So the point here is go serve someone that resonates with a little bit of your fear, and go try something to get out of your comfort zone in a bigger, bolder way. And the last thing that you can do as an intermediate step is go beyond just saying thanks, but keep a gratitude journal. And a gratitude journal, I've been doing this now for about the last 15 years, and it makes a huge difference in your life. Every morning, what I do is I wake up and I write in my gratitude journal 3 things I was thankful for the previous day. Again, I've talked about gratitude a lot. It makes us acknowledge that good things happen. We have to recognize the giver of that gift. Gratitude, like faith, is the antithesis of fear. So I write down 3 things I'm thankful for every day, and then I write down what the best thing that happened to me that day was, and then I ask myself, who did I thank? Who did I go out of my way to, or even in my way, and particularly offer them verbal, heartfelt thanks? So keeping a gratitude journal is a longer-term commitment than just saying thank you every now and again, but it provides deep and rich gratification for us and satisfaction as we look at all the good things that are happening in our lives, and it helps us defang fear. So what if you're ready for some adult steps to tackle some fears that you have head on? Well, we talked about this in the last presentation about living in the moment or living in the holy present. But remember, fear is always about the future. It's never about the present. It's what's going to happen next, not what's happening right now. So all of those things I talked about before, mindful meditation, crafts and hobbies, date nights, rituals, and gratitude are powerful ways to allow you to live in the moment. And that's a way of defanging our fears, is learning to live in the here and now. Analyze your fear. Where did it come from? When did it start? What sets it off? What are the particular contexts that make you particularly jumpy or afraid? And how do I react? When I'm afraid, do I have a go-to? That I eat lots of chocolate, or that I always go to a movie or something? How do I react when I find myself in this state of fear? This takes some deep introspection and some time that you'll have to set aside. And it takes the ability and the willingness to look into yourself and see things that might not be comforting to you. It's the ultimate metacognition. Where did my fears come from? Did they come from when I was a little child? Many of my fears stemmed from being a little kid, because when I was in the 7th grade, I weighed a sum total of 72 pounds. So I was a small kid for my age, and that gave rise. I was afraid of bullies. I was afraid of a lot of different things because I was little. And as I learned those things and understand where my fear comes from, it allows me to see common threads. You can look for contexts or events that tend to make you more anxious or afraid, and then think about your reactions. Next, think about cultivating emotional vulnerability. One of the reasons that we're not vulnerable with other people, that we don't share with them, is because we're afraid of their response. So share something good that happened to you with a real person. Go beyond the gratitude journal and seek out someone and say, hey, I wanted to share with you something great that happened in my life that I really feel good about. Share a childhood dream with a real person. I know we're just doing this in video, but my childhood dream was to be an NFL quarterback. And you can imagine what a shocking dream that was for a boy who was 72 pounds in the 7th grade. But I always wanted to be an NFL quarterback when I was a kid. And of course, I never made it. And that was a source of some disappointment in my life. But then I realized I could do other things. So that was a big childhood dream of mine. Share a current aspiration with a real person. One of the things that I'd like to do as my career goes on is I really want to write a novel. I'm good at writing nonfiction. I'm good at writing scientific research reports, but I've never tried writing any kind of sustained fiction. And I'd really love to attempt to write a novel at some point. So one of the ways that you can be emotionally vulnerable is to pick one of these 3 things and share it with somebody who you trust and who you think will not sort of throw it back in your face, but verbalize these things. It's a way of overcoming fears about our deepest desires and our aspirations. One of the things that we're the most afraid of, and particularly in Latter-day Saint culture, is sadness, disappointment, and negative emotion. We're afraid that somehow that means that we're an imperfect person, or that we're going to become chronically depressed, or that something bad will happen to us. Remember the Savior. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. It doesn't mean in this give yourself over to sadness, revel in disappointment, or become engulfed in negative emotion. It just means give them their place. Allow them to be a part of your life, and realize that living a full and rich life includes sadness as much as joy, disappointment as much as achievement, and negative emotion just as much as positive emotion. That's what it means to live a full life, to really live a rich and full life. So allow those things to have their place in your life, and that's often hard because we're afraid of these things because they're negative and they don't feel good. Pay it forward. This is this is the adult version of gratitude, where we're not only thankful for what we received, but we're willing to act upon that gratitude and actually pay it forward. So don't be afraid to buy a meal for someone. One of the most gratifying things I've done is to see a former student in the airport and be able to buy him or her lunch so that they could make a flight. Take an effort to pay it forward, because that's sort of gratitude in motion, not just gratitude in retrospect. And that's a very adult step. And again, it's hard to be afraid when you're paying it forward. It's hard to be full of fear and be inward focused and downward spiraling when you are taking time to pay it forward to someone else. And finally, if you need to, seek out professional help. There is no shame. There is no problem in psychotherapy or seeing counselors or working with a professional to help us work out that which deeply troubles us. That's one of the ways that the Lord will bless us, is put us in contact with very competent, well-trained people who can help us work on our fears. So if your fears and anxieties about life become overwhelming, the biggest adult step that you might need to take is to seek out professional help. So that concludes the presentation today. And we're now thinking about, now as you think about what you can do, what I want you to do is select one among these 20 things that you can actually do. You'll find this checklist in the Learning Suite folder. Pick one or more of these things if you find yourself gripped by fear, and that becomes a difficult element in decision making. So thank you for your attention, and good luck with this part of the project.